Now, quick.
Speaker.
I call the member Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. As mentioned, we support this bill. It is interesting. We talk about this being a bill introduced in 2008. Well, this was an interrupted reading, Mr Speaker, and the last two national MPs to speak on this were actually Tao Henare and what was that other bloke who was trade? I can't even remember his name. It's shocking, isn't it? A national MP that isn't here anymore. But, Mr Speaker, it has taken a long time for this bill to get here. But not only that, Mr Speaker, this bill actually ratifies a WTO agreement that was established in 1994. It has taken, Mr Speaker, a long time for New Zealand to recognise its WTO obligations. And I actually think both parties, both governments are probably to blame for not getting it here a lot earlier. In fact, there have been three governments. There's been a national government, there's been a Labor government and another national government in the time this was actually ratified in Marrakesh by the WTO in 1994. As mentioned, Mr Speaker, this is about anti-dumping. It's a temporary protection, and it talks about temporary protection from serious injury. And serious injury isn't particularly well defined, but it basically says in the Act that a serious injury is that an injury is imminent. As mentioned by the last speaker, there are 75 days for an investigation period. This may be drawn out if the Chief Executive or the applicant provides further information, but I would hope from a business perspective and a trade perspective, it would be all done and dusted within 75 days, Mr Speaker. Some things that the Chief Executive must investigate when a safeguard issue or an application has been brought forward are things about whether the increased imports, have actually caused serious injury or a threat of serious injury. So there must be a very real threat of injury. So, for example, we just can't have a dumping of material, or a whole dumping of material that doesn't cause serious injury, even if it is dumped, but there's no injury that's been caused. And it's also whether the increased imports were due to unforeseen developments and whether the safeguard measures are necessary to prevent or remedy serious injury and to facilitate adjustment by the domestic injury to the increased import of, the increased imports, Mr Speaker. We are a very open economy, and that has served us well over the last 20 years, but because of that, Mr Speaker, it has brought risks. We have seen our local manufacturing industry decimated over the last 6-9 years, and in fact a number of excuses that have been used are things like the high exchange rate. But every now and again we do get a dumping issue in here, and I remember one Fisher and Paykel actually, I think there was a Chinese company Hire dumped washing machines or whiteware into the country, and that was bought, an anti-dumping action was brought against us. But when we talk about this, Labor has always been the party that has supported free trade. We signed the free trade agreement with China. One of our own Prime Ministers, Mike Moore, was Director General of the WTO. He is now Ambassador to the United States, working very hard on the TPP. So Labor has had a very, very active role. We had Phil Goff, Mr Chair, who I think ended up signing more free trade agreements than any previous trade minister for and against. But the thing about trade, I'm not skiting or anything like that. The thing about free trade is we've basically taken a bipartisan approach. In fact, I think, if I'm right, the only party that really hasn't supported free trade agreements in this parliament, certainly in my term, have been the Greens. And they may have their reasons, but I think in the 21st century, Mr Speaker, free trade is just an economic necessity. And in this day and age, as countries become more and more specialised, it is not just companies, but it is countries that are seeking global competitive advantages. But also with an opening economy, what we are finding is that we do need to ensure that the industries we do have in this country are protected, because it is open to abuse. And we around the world, there are instances where either feast or famine in one area, and I'm not just talking about foodstuffs, creates an opportunity for dumping. And we were one of the most liberalised economies very early on, and we have seen this. So we do need to protect these, Mr Mr. Speaker. The existing Act, which is the Temporary Safeguard Authorities Act 1987, was subject to review under the Labor-led government, and it did include wide public consultation, because this has pretty serious consequences. The last thing we want to see, and the last thing we need to see in this country, Mr. Speaker, is companies and industries closed down simply because of dumped goods by a large, major global competitor from another country. So we do support this bill, Mr. Speaker. We think it adds just further strength to our already enviable reputation. But as mentioned, it brings us into line with WTO regulations, which is in the end most important. Thank you.